This is our ongoing series on clothing from Roman era Palmyra. And in this video, we're going to look at the sculptures and the attributes in them which tell us about the person, things like their social class, their role. If you're interested in this topic, the Palmyra Portrait Project team have done a lot of articles and book chapters where they do things like analyse the frequency of hand positions, things in the hands, the different languages used in the writing, how common certain attributes are. A lot of the sculptures have text. It is usually behind the person. So for example, here, and it's typically in Aramaic, but it is also sometimes found in Greek or Latin. And it usually has the person's name and then describes them in relation to someone else. So it might be this person, daughter of that person. In this case, we can see that this is a obviously wealthy woman. She's wearing a lot of jewelry and she's holding a small child in her arms. This is a banqueting scene and we can see a man and a woman here. They're obviously quite well off. And in here, the text is shown up here. And this is unusual because it is surrounded by a decoration. We can tell that they're fairly well off because of the high quality of the sculpture and because we can see that the woman is wearing some jewelry, the man is wearing a decorated tunic and pants. He's dressed in what we would like describe as the more Parthian style. Because he has a beard and curls in his hair, this is probably a bit later, so probably 2nd to 3rd century AD. Men would often be depicted holding a scroll, and this indicates that they're literate and that they're owning property. Now this makes sense because we are usually going to find that the people with the fancy tombs are well off and they want to communicate that. Here we can see the scroll in his hand here. Behind him is a tent hanging behind and it is supported by leaves. And we can see he is also wearing a band around his head there. And this style of curls shown on his hair is also indicating it's probably 2nd to 3rd century AD. If the man was a scholar, he may have chosen to be depicted with wax tablets and a stylus. In the left-hand example, we can see that there's actually some writing painted onto the tablet that it is in Greek. It is telling us that this was a man who was educated, who could read and write in Greek. The right-hand picture, he's carrying a little satchel of the bound wax tablets in his hand there. This is a surviving wax tablet that was actually written by a schoolboy from Palmyra, and he's practicing writing in Greek and he's copying out fables by Babrius. So you're probably familiar with Aesop's fables. They're stories which are used to educate people. They have a moral to them. This is fables by another Greek writer, Babrius. We also find that a lot of the time there are animals depicted behind the person, typically horses and camels. And there is a whole article looking at that, whether it is trying to depict them as a merchant or as a traveller or it has a religious significance. In this picture, we can see the little horse with his head popping out around the shoulder there. This one here, we can see a merchant and he's got a beard and curly hair. And behind him, we have this rather adorable little camel. And then in his hand, he is holding what looks to be a scroll. Priests were always depicted wearing a particular style of hat, which we can see here. And it was often decorated with a wreath, with then a medallion in the middle here. We can see other things here, like a decorative border on his cloak. We can see the text behind him here, the remains of a person behind him there. So that would be showing him in relation to another person. In his hands, he's holding a bowl and a pitcher, which would be used for the offerings. Here we have another two examples of the priests. The one here on the left, we can see the bowl with the offerings. Looks kind of like baked beans. Over here, we can see that this priest has got a plant in his hand, probably laurel. And we can see that both of them are wearing that distinctive hat with a wreath and a medallion. When we look at women, they tend to be depicting their role as the manager of the household. And so we see about a third of the women are holding a spindle and distaff for spinning a thread. They may also have a key to show that they're managing the household. So here, for example, we can see that she has a spindle and distaff in her hand here. And as usual, we can see the text behind here. And we can tell that she's from a moderately well-off household. She's wearing earrings. She's got a brooch here holding her mantle. Here we have another example where we've obviously got a fairly wealthy woman, but she is still holding the spindle and distaff in her hands to indicate that role. A few interesting things here. She's wearing a fair amount of jewellery, and that on her mantle here we can see some fringing. And we'll talk more about the details of her clothing later on in a later video. Here we have another woman. In this case, she's holding a bowl and it looks like she's ready to sprinkle an offering. So they think that this woman was probably a priestess. And again, we've got a little bit of fringing around her cuff of her tunic here and probably on her headband here. It's unlikely that that's a fringe of hair. It's more likely to be a fringing on the headband. Here we have a pair of people being depicted, and this is actually a mother and a son. We have the text behind us here. The woman is in mourning, and there's a few things that tell us that. One is that her chest is uncovered, and this is something that was done to indicate mourning. It might be one side of the chest or both. Her hair is loose, and she's holding a bowl which would have contained the funeral food. So that is telling us that she is in mourning and that she is mourning for her son. Here we can see her hand on his shoulder. We know that she is in mourning for him because it's indicated that he is the deceased. He's holding a sword. We can see the pommel of the sword in his hand. And behind him, we have that tent hanging, and it's supported by leaves coming up here. And this is telling us that he is the deceased person. She is mourning for him. When we look at the portraits, every single one is telling us a bit about that person, their story, and how they chose to be depicted for the afterlife. Thank you very much. In the next couple of videos, we'll start looking at the clothing. And thank you.